So many thanks for this friendly introduction, and also many thanks to my American colleague Lawrence Larry Rosenwald, who translated both my paper and the Yiddish quotations in it. Modernist Yiddish literature was a crucial part of the Yiddish cultural response to the existential turmoil caused by the First World War. This minor literature, to use Kafka's phrase, kleine Literatur, came into being without the support of a nation-state and in aligned environments. Modern Yiddish literature emerged from geographically. Just do whatever you need to do so you can be comfortable.
Ici ça.
No, let's do this one. Okay,
So, just open it and then we will be sure that we can proceed.
that's true.
Great. Okay. So, modern Yiddish literature emerged from geographically fragmented yet linguistically and ideationally linked territories. It created a worldwide cultural space later to be called the land of Yiddish or Yiddishland. Extraterritoriality. In the first volume of the avant-garde journal Albatros, published in September 1922 in Warsaw, the young poet Uri Zvi Grinberg, at that time still writing in Yiddish, reflected on the needs and goals of Yiddish poetics due to the living conditions of Yiddish poets in his anonymously published Proklamierung, and urged: a brick, vier Wände und a Balken für die heimlose Dichterjechidin in sehr fremdländerischer Umwogglung in die verschiedenen Zentren von jiddisch-völkischer Exterritorialkeit. Understanding the notion exterritorial literally, he lamented the dispersed character of Jewish existence outside of a territory it could call its own. Exterritorial Yiddish literature suffered, said Grinberg, from a centrifugal drift as a result of its geographical fragmentation. He saw in its being unhoused, in its lacking a common center, the cause of all the artistic difficulties he wished by his manifesto to put an end to. In an expressionist manner, he set himself against pseudo-expressionism and Schund, called for renewal, awakening, and revolution of the spirit. In the path of liberation of the albatross of young Yiddish poetry, as he called it, he saw as located in chance, savage, chaotic bleeding, in free, naked human expression. With its call for aesthetic autonomy, designed to revolutionize the whole Jewish way of life, to transport it into a utopian aesthetic space, the manifesto was squarely in the tradition of the European avant-garde. Like other avant-garde manifestos, Grinberg's proclamation of a new order was meant as a counter-concept to the circumstances in place and as the engine of a radical project, here, the project of the Yiddish modern, which was also part of the Jewish Renaissance. In May of 1922, the New York Review Zukunft published a long essay by the critic Shmuel Niger on the question of the widely dispersed regions of Yiddish literature. In it, he argued against the notion that the Jewish people and its literature were extraterritorial. In der Emerson seien wir in einem mit unserer Sprache und Literatur und unser ganzen geistigen Vermögen polyterritorial. Das heißt, wir schweben nicht in der Luft, wir seien nicht abgerissen vom Boden, noch verkehrt. Wir ziehen die Chune von verschiedenen Bodens, befinden sich unter dem Einfluss von verschiedenen Klimaten, verschiedene Svives. Sehr Elementswirkungen begegnen sich, kommen sich zu neu, stoßen sich zusammen oder beheften sich in unser allgemein nationalen Schaffen. In Sachakel wären Bottel die Schuhe von die besonderen ortigen Kräften, es bleibt nur sehr Vereinigung, sehr unterste Schuhe. Aber das ist, wenn es redet sich wegen unserer Sprache oder Literatur oder Kultur im Ganzen genommen. Teilen seien zu ein Gegend, zu ein physischer und historischer Zwiebel mehr zugebunden wie zu alle anderen. Teilen von dem jiddischen Volk und sein Schaffen seien territoriell. Und es ist der Fall wichtig zu wissen, was für ein Heilig es hat in unser geistiger und speziell literarische Nachle, die oder jene von die dosige territorielle Gruppes. Niger is not seeking a unity of nation and state. Rather, he uses the adjective territorial in the sense of belonging to a geographical domain and its local minority culture. He stresses the accomplishment of Yiddish language and literature, which come into being in diverse processes of cultural transfer and in various localities, and which fuse their polyterritorial components into a genuine culture. For the young poet David Markish, there was in this mode of existence, in the Yiddish Wandergeist, as he calls it, precisely the potential for an original and also a universal literature, as he noted with some irony in Chaliastre, in the journal Chaliastre, in that very same year. Efscher konamol as a unruhiger Wandergeist, as a Brodiagschaft, geben an ebermenschliche, an internationale Kultur auf etwas abrodiagischen Loschen. It's beautiful, this formulation of Markish. Markish clarified his conception in December of 1924 in a talk at the Vilna Philharmonic. Efter in der Klolle von unserer Bodenlosigkeit nestigt sich die Broche von Überbodenkeit. The ensuing international spirit of the Jewish people, he argued, had fertilized other peoples and cultures and been fertilized by them as well, and would be in Zuneufbauung mit der jiddischen Sprache, was ist euch elementenweise intersprachlich, müssen führen zu der Entdeckung von das Universale und allgemein Menschliche in der Literatur. In Markish's view, the particular conditions of countrylessness had shaped a spirit that could accomplish its own processes of transmission and of cultural transfer, and that could thus transnationalize itself. The expressive instrument of this spirit, the Yiddish language, which Markish called intersprachlich, interlingual, because of its genesis in contact with the languages of the surrounding cultures, is, he argues, especially able and obliged to bring forth a literature in which what comes to expression is not particularities, but universals. And since Markish recognized the intellectual potential in these particular life conditions, He rejected the call made by some critics to emphasize the national element of Yiddish art and literature by reconfiguring tradition of the past. Der Pachet vor Selbstverlieren sich in der geistigen Bodenlosigkeit ist so groß, als zwingt uns zu binden zu sich unsere Kultur, unsere Nationalität, unsere Traditions auf ein Strick von Einbildung. Punkt wie die Bergsteiger binden sich zu einer zum anderen mit Strick in der Steigung. Also willen wir zubinden zu sich unsere geistigen Ichen. Vergessen wir dabei, als das, was wir können zubinden, ist in uns Guffe, in unser Steigen selbst. Und das, was wir willen zubinden, ist nicht da, ist äußer uns. Markisch, like the European avant-garde, opposed to the aestheticization of the national, the autonomy of the creative process, and so proceeded dialectically. Der Fall ist die Frage nicht wegen Stilisieren und Bearbeiten, nur wegen Schaffen. Die Frage ist nicht wegen Suchen äußer sich, nur Suchen und Groben in sich selbst. Weil suchendig in sich selbst groben wir bemähle die Vergangenheit, die Traditions und unsere Granitepoche, weil sie sind in uns. Weil was denn sehnen wir, ob nicht sehr lebendigste Ausdruck, sehr lebendigste Resultat? Das Land Jiddisch. The project of the Yiddish modern was carried out by engaged writers, artists, scholars, patrons, by organizations bound to parties, an organization that transcended parties. For example, die Kulturliga. The conceptions of Yiddish secular culture were so different as were the various ideologies they were stamped by. The target group of the culture producers and activists was above all the broad Yiddish-speaking working class and the lower middle class in the great cities. The leading actors in shaping the Yiddish modern were the writers, and the chief role in the project was played by an emerging Yiddish literature. That literature did not just embody the geographically fragmented cultural realm, it guaranteed, by means of the Yiddish language, the means of holding that realm together. If I may quote myself, language and text became a portable homeland. Cultural production worked to shape community, and Yiddish writers spoke of themselves as a family, Schreibermischproche. An extremely heterogeneous family, to be sure. Its members were arguing in 1925, for example, over the question which of the Yiddish literary centers, Warsaw, New York, or Moscow, deserved primacy. At issue was, I quote, hegemony over the whole of Yiddish literature, the location of the chief center above all the future of Yiddish artistic creation, end quote, as the journalist Nachman Meisel summed it up. He then argued, or even pleaded, verfallen. Wir seien äußeren Luchegrenzen und Länder mit unser jiddischen Schaffen. Das verlangt die einheitliche jiddische Literatur, das allweltliche jiddische Schaffen, welchem wir alle dienen und zu welchem wir alle streben. With this interjection, verfallen, it's hopeless. Meisel expresses not only indignation but also acceptance of the peculiar position of Yiddish literature with its genesis outside of nation-state borders and beyond state affiliations. The problematic aspect of the situation will not, for him, be dealt with the establishing of chief center, but rather calls for the unification of all the Yiddish literary production of all the various places in the world. Instead of a hierarchy, that is, Meisel aims at a solidarity and coherence of the far-flung literary fields. The Yiddish minority literature developed globally through various nation-states and in constant contact with the majority cultures surrounding it. Where it existed, it was foreign, conditioned by the tension between cultural difference and the author's own confident sense of transculturality. The aesthetic program, the connection of values and models of the European modern, aimed at belonging to world literature. But such belonging required external reinforcement, a recognition of the small literature by a European institution. Such recognition came to Yiddish literature when on June 20, 1927, the International PEN Congress approved the application submitted by the Warsaw Association of Yiddish Writers and Journalists and accepted this stateless Jewish literature in Hebrew and in Yiddish as a full member of the organization. Melech Ravitch, then the association secretary, reported later in his memoirs that during the negotiations with PEN, a question came from London. Where was the geographical center of Yiddish literature? What country would the Yiddish authors represent? In response to which, after long debates in the association local at Klomatsky 13, the applicants responded, Yiddish. With this word appearing in Yiddish at the end of the list of nations associated with PEN, the literature without a country became a republic of letters. With the acceptance of this stateless literature in PEN, the often lamented extraterritorial condition of Yiddish was surprisingly and audaciously re-evaluated. The recognition meant as much as a territory, a fact symbolized by the new national name. In this sense, Yiddish was now an innovatively used expression. The adjective originally meaning, as you all know, Jewish, though also indicating the Yiddish language and what was created in it, became in 1927 the name of a country that no map would show. A metaphor, therefore, but also the birth of a utopian project, a special counter-world in which for some years the connection between cultural difference and cosmopolitan Weltanschauung could not only be thought, but also apparently could be lived. A Yiddish Republic of Letters as a national literature of the Jews. The Republic was both national and transnational. The mode of living connected with it was called allweltlich or allländisch. To give one example of many, in a formal welcome to Niger, presented in Kaunas in 1931, the then high school teacher Judelmark characterized the land of Yiddish as das Land, was ist umetig und interterritorial und vereinigt das ganze jiddische Volk. The aesthetic discourse. An exploration of terms, concepts, and the usage of programmatic texts of the 1920s indicates that early theorizations of literature were instruments of cultural and political aesthetics. I would like to look closely at a dominant concept in that discourse, Weltliteratur. What did the concept of world literature mean for the project of Yiddish modernism? And what did Yiddish literature have to accomplish to become part of it? Already in summer 1926, Melech Ravitch had communicated the association's undertaking to the readers of the weekly review Literarische Blätter with the following argument. Wir sind ein Volk, haben eine Sprache und eine Literatur und sind exterritorial. Welt darf sein das Ziel von jeder Literatur, und Natie darf sein die Dergleichung ihrer. Like Markish before him, Ravitch saw in a universalist orientation the path towards a development of a genuine national literature. Are both authors presuming the universalizability of the peculiar? Or do they regard language-specific cultural distinctiveness and the universal inventory of motives, aesthetic forms, poetic procedures as complementary? The new participation in international pen activities, the discussions revealed all too vividly the tension between nationalism and internationalism, between an ideal country and a concrete cultural community. Shmuel Niger focused on the question of what was national literature, what was world literature, what tasks were implied for Yiddish literature in a series of articles published first in the New York journal Der Tag and then in expanded form in Literarische Blätter. In the first of these articles he notes that in the new situation Yiddish literature is the instrument of our whole national culture, and that it was now necessary to pose the question of universalism. A nationale Literatur kann nicht und will nicht sein kein Ghetto-Literatur. A nationale Literatur, das ist die Kehle, auf welcher a Natie spielt euch ihr Welt nigen. Drückt euch ihr Welt Anschauung. Nationale Literatur und Weltliteratur sind nicht kein zwei gar besondere Sachen. Also wie Natie und Welt sind nicht kein zwei besondere Sachen. Nationale Literatur, das ist eine gewisse Madrege und eine gewisse Form von Weltliteratur. Muss in einem mit der nationalen Rolle von der jiddischen Wortschaffung klar werden, ihr allgemein menschlicher Wert. Ob sie ist schon bei MS eine nationale Literatur, muss sie schon sein euch ein Teil von der Weltliteratur. In Niger's view, authors of national literary works create them from a peculiar folk life and folk tradition, from the culture in which they were rooted. These works would be therefore neither untranslatable nor incomprehensible for other cultures, for the deep roots extended down to the root of all humanity, to the universal foundation. Zu die Urquellen von unser Kiem, to the origins of our human existence. Such works reden zu der Menschheit durch sehr Volk, speak to humanity through their individual people. Niger seems to be presupposing an archetypical repository of collective forms and motives which in such works are shaped in a culturally specific way. Hence, the fact that works of world literature are comprehensible and valuable for members of diverse peoples and cultures. Aber in der Tiefenisch von seiner Schomme ist jedes Volk der Scheurech von der Menschheit. Auf ihr höchster Madrege ist jede Natie ein Seil von der Welt. Like Goethe, Nigger saw in world literature the processes of culture transcending reception and communication, motivated by curiosity, interest, or admiration. Curiosity and interest, Nigger considered period-specific phenomena, sustained in part by extra-literary factors. Admiration, on the other hand, admiration for the aesthetic quality of literary works beyond boundaries of a language, a nation, a culture, seemed to him to establish the timeless renown as works of world literature. As for the Yiddish literature now coming into being, which had become part of the international literary community, Nigger expressed the wish that it not only evoke curiosity and interest, but also put down strong roots which would reach the foundation of the world, as he called it. And from these deep springs bring forth works compelling admiration. The aesthetic of Yiddish works was to result from the interplay between particular and the general, an early mode of thinking globally. Die Welt wird sich sicher verinteressieren mit unseren national zwiebedicke Schreiber, wie mit die, was seinen unzwiebedig und anational. Die in jiddische Farben eingetunkene, in jiddischen Lebensboden eingewurzelte Schreiber können sicher haben in sich verborgen allgemein menschliche Werten wie die onkollierendicke, ausgewurzelte jiddische Literaten. Nigger's reflections on the relations between Yiddish literature and world literature came in relation to a particular occasion. The Geneva-based International Institute for Intellectual Cooperation proposed to the Yiddish Pen Club to submit a list of the 20 best works of that literature to be translated for the international market. Commissions were formed in Warsaw, New York, Vilna, to collect proposals for inclusion. Nachman Meisel weighed in with a question: mit welchem Werk dürfen wir kommen zu der Weltliteratur? With which works should we enter into world literature? He, like Nigger, speaks against quasi-universal works in favor of authentic Yiddish ones. Wir wären jetzt gleichberechtigte Bürger in der internationalen Welt von Literatur. Und lassen wir wissen, wie abzuschätzen hat die neue Wendung in der Weltliteratursphäre. Lassen wir sich nicht jagen mit glatte, poschete, universale Schaffungen, nicht die einfache, glattige, literarisch abgetakte Werke ohne einen eigenen Porzeponym wollen interessieren dort. Zu der Welt dürfen wir kommen nur mit einem solchen jüdischen Werk, welche haben einen eigenen, eigenartigen Charakter, Stil, Form und Inhalt. Meisel called for an aesthetic and also a thematic distinctiveness in Yiddish literature as a condition of its being related to other literatures in the context of world literature. His claim rested on the notion, widely disseminated among Yiddish writers, that in contrast with works of assimilated non-Yiddish writing Jewish authors, and right next to Hebrew literature, Yiddish literature was the national literature of Jews. Nachman Meisel, an eminent figure among the non-party linked activists, was co-founder of the Polish transnational organization Kulturliga, and editor of the Warsaw journal Literarische Blätter, literary pages. The latter constituted the most important platform for the diasporic Yiddish intelligentsia from Buenos Aires to Berlin to Johannesburg. It was the only European weekly published continuously from 1924 to 1939 with subscribers all over the world. It, more than any other publication, embodied the transnational Yiddish Republic of Letters. Yiddishland. Since 1934, Meisel had been an advocate of a transnational Yiddish organization which would coordinate Yiddish cultural activity in the face of growing anti-Jewish persecution. In this context, the term Yiddishland, though there are no textual instances of it in the early 20s, occurs frequently in print and, for the most part, in quotation marks. In the Chicago journal Yiddish, Chaim Zhitlowski, who was the cultural theorian of Yiddish modernism, is characterized as the president of Yiddishland. In Literarische Blätter, the Vilna Yivo is called the capital of Yiddishland. So you see, Yiddishland all of a sudden has a president and has a capital. In 1935, Yivo invited scholars, artists, writers, and cultural activists from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania, Austria, Palestine, the United States, Argentina, and Mexico to a gathering in Vilna. 120 delegates assembled there, among them the historian Simon Dubnov and the painter Marc Chagall. At that conference, Yiddishland was a buzzword. The author Elias Schulman from Slutsk in Belarus and living then in New York, wrote, Richtigs ist der Begriff Yiddishland, hab ich erst verstanden, wenn ich hab verlassen New York. Schon seiendig in der kosmopolitischen Stadt Paris, hab ich gesehen deutlich, als es existiert ein Sammelland wie Yiddishland. Auf die schönen Pariser Boulevarden hört man unser Jiddisch. In die Cafés auf dem Montparnasse klingt heimisch unser Jiddisch Loschen. In die Kiosken sind aufgehangen jiddische Zeitungen, was erscheinen in Paris. In Ort der größeren Weltstadt habe ich getroffen jiddische Schreiber, jiddische Menschen, was weitigen mit dieselben Problemen, was mir, die Jiddischisten, in New York. Der Bürger von Yiddishland fühlt sich gleich sehr heimisch wie nur Vorterein in Warschau, die Stadt, das ist eine von unseren 3 Hauptstädten. Aber Gorbazoibern fahren Bürger von Jiddischland ist Wilne. Da habe ich zum ersten Mal in 15 Jahren der Herd, wie kleine Kinderlech reden zwischen sich Jiddisch. Ich habe spaziert auf die Hauptgassen von Wilne und gehört, wie junge Freilins und Buchurim reden zwischen sich Jiddisch. Eine Sache, was ist eine Seltenheit bei uns in New York. In the debate over protecting Yiddish culture, which eventually led to the first transnational Yiddish Cultural Congress held in Paris in 1937, the cosmopolitan figure of thought constituted by Yiddishland took a clearer shape. Yiddishland was a territory of the mind. It embodied a transnational mode of thought and life called in Yiddish Allweltlich, by which was meant the coherence of a heterogeneous Yiddish culture across diverse nations and state boundaries. In this diasporic space concept, one remained housed in language despite all persecution and migration. The hybridity of that language, making possible both distinction from the given majority culture and proximity to it, was determinative for cultural self-comprehension. The inner enemies of Yiddishland then were Zionism and assimilation. In both modes of life, the Yiddish elements were suppressed. In September 1937, by legal and half-legal means, Yiddishists from 23 countries arrived in Paris for the first transnational Yiddish Cultural Congress. Writers, journalists, scholars, artists, culture activists. 101 voting delegates represented 677 Yiddish cultural organizations worldwide. At the solemn opening ceremony on September 17th, there were some 4,000 people in the magnificent Wagram Hall. Given that the Congress had met with opposition in bourgeois and socialist circles alike, and in particular from the Bund, it was a great success. Those who nevertheless came to Paris and took advantage of the occasion to visit the World's Fair with Picasso's Guernica and Albert Speer's German pavilion, no doubt also saw the first pavilion of Yiddish culture right next door. This is one of the historical jokes that Albert Speer, the German pavilion, was next door to the Yiddish pavilion of this event, yes. In it, one could see maps of the world's Jewish population and displays of the history of Yiddish language, literature, journalism, and workers' movements. In the international pavilion, a sign in big red letters in both Yiddish and French proclaimed that 11 million people speak Yiddish. Chaim Sloves greeted the delegates at the ceremony as follows. Die Einheit von allen lebendigen jüdischen Kulturkeuches ist nicht bloß das heiligste Gebot von der Show, noch euch der einzige Mittel, wie so zu schaffen, von abgerissenen, zersplitterten Kulturwerten ein große, mächtige, vollblutige und vollwirkende jüdische Kultur. Die jiddisch-weltliche Kultur, was ist gebeut und ausgetragen durch die breitste jüdische Volksmassen, ist in ihr Mohes eine und dieselbe in allen Ländern, wo sie schafft sich. Die Ziele, die Deiges und Sorgen von jüdischen Kulturschaffer und Kulturtour sind dieselbe in gar der Welt. Darüber ist die Einheit von die jüdisch-weltlichen Kulturkeuches von alle ohne Ausnahme bloß eine Frage von Zeit. Der heutige Kongress wird davon helfen schaffen, auch die dosige Einheit. Er wird sie schaffen, ob wir willen, als die jüdische Kultur soll leben. Ob wir willen beim jüdischen Schriftsteller, beim jüdischen Künstler, beim jüdischen Lehrer, beim jüdischen Akteur und beim jüdischen Wissenschaftler verwandeln den Jiddisch in Glauben, die Verzweiflung in Mut, die Abhängigkeit in schöpferische Energie. The new self-assurance in the depiction of unified Yiddish culture as a secular, progressive, popular culture provided the switch points for the deliberately border-transcending connections among all those dispersed at the grassroots level, and thus for the belonging to the international progressive forces of the culture front and the world. One of the most eminent delegates, the novelist Józef Opatoszu, born in Poland in 1886 and resident in New York since 1907, sketched Yiddishland and its value with remarkable confidence in his welcome speech. Ashkenaz hat aufgehört zu sein ein geografischer Begriff. Es ist geworden ein idäischer. Es ist geworden Jiddischland. In Jiddischland geht keinmal die Sonne nicht unter. Jiddischland ist eine höhere Madrege wie zu haben Armeen, Grenzen, Passporten. Es ist noch ein neuer Begriff. Er hält sich schon aber in der Volkssymphonie. Es ist genug, eine Tracht zu tun. Europa, Asien, Afrika, Australien, tausender, zendlich tausender Städte, tausender, zendlich tausender Meil, Jammen, Wälder, Felder, wo es geht auf 24 Show in Mesles, der Klang von Jiddisch, von unser Loschen, das Loschen von dem internationalen Jiddisch-Volk, was glaubt in der Gerechtigkeit, was wird abschaffen Sinne und Hass zwischen Mensch und Mensch, zwischen Volk und Nazie, zwischen Rasse und Rasse. How was it with Yiddishland after the Churban? As early as 1941, the poet Moshe Nadir, born in Eastern Galicia, resident in New York since 1898, wrote in a public letter to Itzik Manger, born in Czernowitz, then living in his London exile, unser Papieren Jiddisch leben, unser Wörtern leben, Itzik Manger, ist schwerer noch wie das physische Leben von unserem Volk. Und wir starben also schwer. Mit dem Tod von jedem jiddischen Leser gehen wir ein Kapetschke auf unsere eigene Leweihe. Auf der Leweihe von der Sprache, was wir haben der Heuben, von der Schoffler Schiffre kimmet zu einer heuche Harente. Schwer ist der Tod von einem jungen Menschen. Schwer ist das Absterben von einer jungen Literatur, welche hat noch gar nicht gelebt. Nicht wie Griechisch und Latein geht uns unsere Sprache, nur eine Sache tragischer. Als wir wird einmal ausgraben unsere Sprache, wirst du, Itzik Manger, getragen werden auf die Hände, Hecher von Homeren, glaub es mir. Ja, du hast ein besser Geurl verdient, Itzik Manger. Aber bei wem soll man mohnen? Wir haben eine Muttersprache, Aziz Trebke Mameloschen. Aber a Mame, auf wemens Achsel sich auszuwähnen, ist nicht da. Wir, Kinder von Mameloschen, seien doch lebendige Säumen. So long as the Yiddish culture centers of Eastern Europe were the heart of Yiddish land, cities like Montreal and Buenos Aires were secondary. With the destruction of the Jewish world of Eastern Europe, these secondary centers, which offered European immigrants a secure dwelling place, became important nexus points in the transnational Yiddish network. The Yiddish cultural metropolises were now New York and Buenos Aires. Yiddish land was fundamentally changed, and not only in geography and demography. In the new spaces, the Yiddish minority culture was not persecuted, but it was worn away by the acceptance of majority language and by the supremacy of Hebrew within Zionism. After the Churban, Yiddishland became again a utopia, and finally an aporia. That Yiddishland, even at its best times, was worldless was noted in 1943 by Isaac Bashevis Singer, who said that there was a contradiction in the existence of Yiddish literature which was, he said, I quote, godly without God and worldly without word. The language that had lost its speakers no longer embodied a territory and a home, but only the past. Of the promise of Yiddishland, only a lieu de mémoire remained. On October 28, 1964, during an episode of Günter Gauss's television program Zur Person, Hannah Arendt stated, I would concede that Jewish people are an apt paradigm of a, and she spoke German, weltloser Volksverband, wordless People's Alliance, maintaining itself through millennia. Gauss commented, world in your terminology meaning a space for the political. Later, Arendt made clear that she understood world more broadly as a space in which things become public, in which people live, and which must appear legitimate to them, in which, of course, art appears, in which everything that is possible appears, end quote. An answer to Arendt's notion of wordlessness is offered by the figure of thought or by the concept called Yiddishland. What does the word mean? In the standard dictionaries, Harkavi 1928 and Weinreich 1968, there is no entry for the term. Not until Neuberg's Yiddish-German dictionary, which is forthcoming, is the word defined as, I quote, the historical or imagined territory of the Yiddish language, end quote. This apt formulation clarifies both the problematic character of the concept and its vagueness. The colloquial notion of the term identifies Yiddishland with the Eastern European habitat of Yiddish-speaking Jews, with its centers in Poland and the Russian Pale of Settlement. The map with which Gérard Sylvain and Henri Michelet prefaced their impressive 1999 collection of postcards from the region provides an excellent model. The idea of Yiddishland as a lieu de mémoire is characteristic of this perspective and widely disseminated, especially since the Churban. Opposing the notion of Yiddish land as a site of memory, Jeffrey Chandler argues in Imagining Yiddish Land for a definition not determined by geography. He defines Yiddish land as a, I quote, virtual locus constructed in terms of the presence of usage of the Yiddish language, especially, though not exclusively, in its spoken form, end quote. This formulation also reveals a post-Choben perspective. Yiddish land as a potential, imaginable space presupposes the destruction of the Yiddish-speaking inhabitants of Eastern Europe and of their dwelling places with them. By defining Yiddish land as a post-vernacular language and culture, Chandler maintains the relevance of the concept even where Yiddish has been abandoned as the medium of Jewish secular culture and no longer functions as a day-to-day language. These examples document the historically and socially determined transformation of a relatively recent concept. But as I argued before the Choben, in 1927, Yiddishland was understood as the name of a country that no map would show. A metaphor, therefore, but also the birth of a utopian project, a spatial counterworld in which, for some years, the connection between cultural difference and cosmopolitan Weltanschauung could not only be thought, but also, apparently, could be lived. A Yiddish Republic of Letters as the national literature of the Jews. Thank you for your attention.